I never thought silence could have a weight to it. But that night in the gym, it did. It pressed against my chest like something physical, something I could almost hold in my hands if I tried. The kind of silence that makes you aware of your own breathing, your own heartbeat, the small shuffle of your shoes against polished wood. The rain had started an hour before, during the last drills. By the time everyone else had cleared out, it was coming down hard enough that you could hear it drumming against the roof, a steady percussion that turned the whole building into an echo chamber. I'd stayed behind to clean up, the way I always did. Towels folded, basketballs racked, water bottles collected from the bleachers where someone always left them. It was routine, predictable, safe. I like things that way. Jonah was still there too, which wasn't unusual. He often lingered after practice, shooting free throws alone or scrolling through his phone on the bench, his long legs stretched out like he owned the place. That was Jonah, confident in a way that seemed effortless, like he'd never questioned his right to take up space in the world. I'd known him for 2 years, and in all that time, I'd learned to admire him from a comfortable distance. Close enough to talk, to laugh at his jokes, to feel the warmth of his attention when it swung my way. Far enough that I didn't have to confront what it meant, that I noticed the exact shade of brown in his eyes, or the way his voice dropped when he was being genuine instead of performing. I was humming. I didn't even realize I was doing it until he spoke. His voice cut through the quiet, lazy and amused. "You trying to get me to dance?" I looked up. He was leaning against the wall near the equipment room, arms crossed, that familiar smirk playing at the corner of his mouth. The gym lights had dimmed to their after-hours setting, casting everything in a softer glow, and he looked different somehow. Less sharp, more real. I laughed, shook my head. "You said you don't." And he had said that multiple times. At parties, at team gatherings, anytime someone tried to pull him onto a dance floor, Jonah would grin and wave them off with the same line. "I don't dance, man. Not my thing." He said it with such certainty that it became part of who he was in my mind. Jonah didn't dance. Jonah didn't sit still. Jonah didn't let anyone see past the surface he'd polished to a mirror shine. He didn't answer me right away. Instead, he pushed off the wall and crossed the floor toward me, his footsteps echoing in the empty space. There was something different in the way he moved, slower, more deliberate, like he was thinking about each step instead of just taking them. When he reached me, he tossed the towel he'd been holding onto the bench. Then he held out his hand. Maybe I just haven't had the right reason to. My heart did something complicated in my chest. A skip, a stumble, a sudden acceleration that made me hyper-aware of the heat creeping up my neck. I stared at his hand, palm up, fingers slightly curled. An offering, an invitation, a question I didn't know how to answer. The smart thing would have been to laugh it off, to make a joke, to keep everything light and easy and safe the way we always did. But there was something in his expression that stopped me, a vulnerability I'd never seen before, hiding just beneath the confidence. Like he was asking for something more than a dance. Like this mattered in a way neither of us was ready to name. I placed my hand in his. His fingers closed around mine, warm and sure, and the air in the gym changed. The joke we'd been building dissolved, and what was left felt too big for the moment, too serious for the dim lights and the rain-soaked quiet. But Jonah didn't let go. He pulled me gently toward the center of the court, to the circle at half court where the school logo was painted in faded blue and gold. He placed his other hand on my back, not tentatively, not like someone who'd never done this before. His palms settled against me with a certainty that made my breath catch. Then he started to move. There was no music, just the rain, steady and rhythmic against the windows. Just our breathing, uneven and too loud in the silence. Just the soft squeak of our shoes against the varnished floor as Jonah guided me into a rhythm I hadn't expected. He wasn't clumsy. That's what surprised me most. I'd expected hesitation, awkwardness, the fumbling of someone who'd meant what he said about not dancing. But his steps were careful, deliberate, like he'd thought about this before, like he'd practiced in private, in moments he'd never told anyone about. We moved slowly across the floor, and I tried to understand what was happening. Try to make sense of the way his hand pressed against my back, firm but gentle, or the way he looked at me like he was memorizing something he was afraid to forget. This was Jonah. Jonah who made everything a joke. Jonah who never let anyone close enough to see him shake. And here he was, trembling slightly, his breath unsteady against my temple as we swayed in the empty gym. His laugh broke the silence, soft and nervous. Told you I don't dance. The words were meant to be light, but they came out strained, like he was trying to convince himself of something he no longer believed. You're doing anyway, I whispered back. He didn't respond. He just pulled me closer, closing the small distance that had been between us, and I felt the full length of him against me. Solid, real, terrifyingly present. And I understood then. This wasn't about dancing. It had never been about dancing. This was about everything we'd never said. Every look that had lasted too long. Every joke that had landed with too much weight. Every moment I'd caught him watching me when he thought I wasn't paying attention, his expression stripped of its usual armor. This was about the space between us that had been shrinking for months, maybe years, and the fear that had kept us from acknowledging it. The rain grew louder, or maybe I was just more aware of it. The sound filled the gym like a heartbeat, steady and insistent, marking time in a way that made everything feel both infinite and fleeting. I could feel Jonah's pulse where our hands were joined, quick and unsteady. Could feel the rise and fall of his chest. Could smell the faint scent of his cologne mixed with sweat and something uniquely him. My throat felt tight. My eyes stung. I wanted to say something, to name what was happening, but the words wouldn't come. So I just followed his lead, let him guide me across the floor in slow, careful circles, and try not to think about what it meant that this felt more honest than anything we'd ever shared. When he finally spoke again, his voice was barely audible over the rain. I didn't lie. I tilted my head to look at him, confused. About what? About not dancing. I just didn't know I could. I should explain how we got here. How two people who barely knew each other 3 years ago ended up in an empty gym at 11 on a Tuesday night, moving to music that didn't exist. I'm 22. I've always been the kind of person who counts things. Steps to my car. Hours until practice. Days since the last time something felt out of control. It's not obsessive, not really. It's just how I manage the world. I like knowing what comes next. I like routines that don't shift beneath me. I wake up at 6. I run the same 3-mile loop. I eat the same breakfast. And for a long time, that was enough. Basketball gave me structure. The plays were choreographed. The drills were repetitive. Even the chaos of a game had patterns you could learn to predict if you paid attention. I was good at paying attention. Good at staying in my lane, doing my job, not asking for more than what was safe to want. Jonah was the opposite of everything I understood. He's 23, a year ahead of me, though he ended up on the same recreational league team through some accident of scheduling and mutual friends. Where I'm measured, he's impulsive. Where I'm quiet, he fills every silence with noise. He talks during warm-ups, during water breaks, during the drive home if you're unlucky enough to carpool with him. He makes everything seem easy, like effort is something other people need, but he was born exempt from. I spent the first 6 months we knew each other being annoyed by him. He'd show up late to practice with some ridiculous excuse, grinning like the rules were suggestions that didn't apply to him. He'd take shots he had no business taking and somehow make half of them. He'd slap my back too hard when I made a good play, his laugh too loud in my ear, his energy too much for the careful space I'd built around myself. But somewhere along the way, annoyance shifted into something else. I started noticing things. The way he stayed after practice, even when he didn't have to. The way his jokes got quieter when it was just the two of us. The way he looked at me, sometimes when he thought I wasn't watching, his expression unguarded for just a moment before the mask slid back into place. We fell into a rhythm without planning it. Most of the team would clear out after practice, but Jonah and I would linger. At first, it was practical. He needed to work on his free throws. I needed to run extra drills. But eventually, the excuses wore thin, and we stopped pretending we had a reason to stay beyond not wanting to leave. We'd shoot around, talking about nothing important. Movies we'd seen, places we wanted to visit someday, complaints about work, about teammates, about the small frustrations of being young and uncertain and trying to figure out what shape our lives were supposed to take. The gym became ours in those late hours. Our private corner of the world where the fluorescent lights hummed low and the rest of existence felt far away. It was easy to talk to Jonah when the audience was gone, when he didn't have to perform. He'd sit on the floor with his back against the wall, legs stretched out, and he'd say things he'd never say in daylight. About his family, about expectations he couldn't meet, about the exhaustion of always being on, always smiling, always pretending he had it all figured out. I told him things too, about my need for control, about the anxiety that lived in my chest like a second heartbeat, about how sometimes I felt like I was watching my own life from a distance, like I was narrating instead of living. He listened. That was the thing that surprised me most. Jonah, who couldn't sit still during team meetings, who scrolled through his phone during film sessions, who seemed allergic to silence, would sit perfectly still and listen to me talk. His eyes would stay on mine, focused and present like nothing else in the world mattered. I think that's when I started to understand the danger I was in, because somewhere between the jokes and the late nights and the way he looked at me when he thought I couldn't see, I'd started wanting something I had no right to want. Started imagining what it would feel like to close the distance between us. Started wondering if the careful space he maintained was about boundaries or fear. I never said anything, never hinted, never let myself believe that what I felt might be mutual, because Jonah was straight, as far as anyone knew, and I'd learned a long time ago not to mistake kindness for something more. But that night, when the rain turned the gym into a cocoon and he reached for my hand, I realized I wasn't the only one who'd been pretending. The gym had always been our refuge, the place where we could be versions of ourselves we didn't show anyone else. But that night, it became something different. It became the place where everything we'd carefully avoided finally broke through the surface. And when Jonah pulled me close, his hand steady on my back, I understood that this moment had been building for months. Every late night, every conversation, every look that lasted too long. We'd been moving toward this without realizing it. And now that we'd arrived, there was no going back to what we'd been before. I need to go back to the exact moment before everything changed. Because there was a before, even if it only lasted seconds. I was humming some song I'd heard on the drive over, something slow and melancholic that had wormed its way into my head. I wasn't even aware I was doing it until Jonah's voice cut through the quiet, teasing and light. "You trying to get me to dance?" I looked up from the equipment bag I'd been organizing, ready to laugh it off, to make some joke that would deflect the attention back onto him. That's what we did. We deflected. We kept things surface level, safe, contained within the boundaries of friendship that neither of us had dared to cross. I laughed. "You said you don't," and that should have been the end of it. You should have grinned, made some quip about having 2 left feet, and we should have finished cleaning up and gone our separate ways like we always did. The script was written. We both knew our lines. But Jonah went off script. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he just looked at me, and something in his expression made my stomach drop. It wasn't his usual easy confidence. It was something rawer, something that looked almost like fear. Then he moved, crossed the space between us with those long strides, his shoes squeaking softly against the polished floor. The sound echoed in the emptiness, loud enough that I was aware of each step, of the shrinking distance, of the way my heart rate picked up with every foot he closed between us. When he reached me, he stopped, stood there for a moment, close enough that I could see the way his chest rose and fell, like he'd been running even though he'd just been standing still. Close enough that I could smell him, that familiar mix of deodorant and sweat, and something underneath that was just Jonah. He tossed his towel onto the bench. The gesture was casual, but his hands weren't quite steady. Then he held one out to me. Maybe I just haven't had the right reason to. The words hung in the air between us, weighted with meaning I wasn't sure I was supposed to understand. His hand was there, palm up, fingers slightly open, waiting. And the way he looked at me, I knew this wasn't a joke anymore. Knew that whatever happened next would mean something neither of us could take back. I should have said no. Should have laughed and stepped away and kept us both safe inside the comfortable distance we'd maintained for 2 years. But I didn't. I couldn't. Because I've been waiting for this without knowing I was waiting. Been wanting this without letting myself admit it. I placed my hand in his. His fingers closed around mine immediately, warm and sure, and I felt the contact everywhere. Not just where skin touched, but in my chest and my throat, in the sudden difficulty I had remembering how to breathe normally. He didn't say anything, didn't make a joke or try to lighten the moment. He just pulled me gently toward the center of the court, and I followed, my feet moving without consulting my brain. When we reached the half-court line, he turned to face me. His free hand came up, hesitated for just a second, then settled against the small of my back. The touch was firm, deliberate, nothing tentative about it. Like he'd thought about exactly where his hand should go. Like he'd imagined this. That realization sent heat flooding through me. I didn't know where to look. At his face, too close and too intense. At our joined hands, his thumb now resting against my knuckles. At the empty gym around us, witness to whatever this was becoming. Then he started to move, and I stopped thinking altogether. The first step wasn't clumsy. That's what shocked me. I'd expected awkwardness, the stumbling of someone who'd spent years insisting he couldn't do this. But Jonah's first step was sure. Practiced, like he'd done this before, even if only in his mind. He guided me into a slow rhythm. Nothing fancy, just a gentle sway that matched the rain drumming against the windows. His hand on my back pressed slightly, steering me, and I let him lead, even though I had no idea where we were going. We moved across the varnished floor, our shoes whispering against the wood. There was no music except the storm outside and the sound of our breathing, uneven and too loud in the silence. But somehow it was enough. Somehow the absence of music made it more intimate, like we were creating something that belonged only to us. I could feel every point where our bodies connected. His hand in mine, his palm against my back, the front of his shirt brushing against my chest when the space between us narrowed, the heat coming off him, the slight tremor in his fingers that told me he was nervous despite the confidence in his movements. His breath was warm against my temple. I could hear him swallow, could sense the war happening inside him, the same war I'd been fighting for months. The fear, the want, the terror of what it meant to stop pretending. When he spoke, his voice was rough, stripped of its usual lightness. Told you I don't dance. It was meant to sound casual, but it came out shaky, vulnerable, like he was trying to hide behind the old joke, but couldn't quite pull it off anymore. I tilted my head slightly, just enough to see his face. His eyes were closed, his jaw tight, like he was concentrating on something difficult. You're doing it anyway, I whispered. He opened his eyes then, looked at me, and what I saw there made my throat close. He wasn't joking, wasn't hiding. For the first time since I'd known him, Jonah was letting me see everything he usually kept locked away. And then he pulled me closer, eliminating the last careful inches between us, and I stopped being able to tell where I ended and he began. The rain became a presence. Not background noise anymore, but something alive, filling the space around us with steady percussion. It turned the gym into something separate from the rest of the world, a pocket of time that existed outside the normal rules. Inside these walls, with the lights dimmed and the windows blurred with water, we could be anyone. We could be honest. Jonah's palm pressed more firmly against the small of my back, and I felt the pressure travel on my spine. His hand was large, warm through the thin fabric of my shirt, and the way it rested there felt possessive in a way that should have scared me, but didn't. It felt right, like it had always been meant to land exactly there. We moved in slow circles across the floor, our feet finding a rhythm that had nothing to do with skill and everything to do with trust. I could feel him learning me, the way I shifted my weight, the way I followed his lead even when I didn't know where he was taking us, the way I'd stopped trying to maintain the distance that had always existed between us. His thumb moved against my back, a small circular motion that might have been unconscious, or might have been deliberate. With Jonah, I was learning I couldn't tell the difference anymore. Everything felt intentional now, weighted with meaning I'd been missing all along. I became aware of details I'd never let myself notice before. The way his chest rose and fell against mine. The warmth of his breath near my ear. The faint stubble on his jaw that I could see when I dared to look up. The way his eyes stayed mostly closed, like he was afraid that opening them fully would break whatever spell we were under. He adjusted his grip on my hand, lacing our fingers together instead of holding them formally, and the shift felt monumental. More intimate, more real. His palm was callous from years of basketball, rough against my own, and I could feel his pulse where our wrists touched. Fast, unsteady, mocking mine. We turned slowly, and I caught our reflection in the darkened windows. Two figures moving together in the half-light, close enough to be one shadow. I barely recognized us. Or maybe I recognized us for the first time. This is who we'd been all along, underneath the careful performance we'd been giving everyone else. Jonah's laugh broke the silence, soft and nervous, and I felt it more than heard it. The vibration traveled through his chest and mine. Told you I don't dance. His words were meant to lighten the moment, to give us both an escape route if we needed one. But his voice betrayed him. It shook, cracked slightly on the last word, and I understood that he was as terrified as I was, standing on the edge of something we couldn't come back from. "You're doing it anyway," I whispered back. The words came out quieter than I'd intended, barely audible over the rain. But I knew he heard them because his hand tightened on my back, his fingers pressing into me like he was afraid I might disappear. He didn't reply. Instead, he pulled me closer, closing what little distance remained between us. And suddenly we weren't just dancing anymore. We were holding each other, clinging to each other. His chest was flush against mine, his heart hammering so hard I could feel it. His forehead dropped to rest against the side of my head, and I felt his breath hot and uneven against my neck. This was nothing like the casual shoulder bumps or high fives we'd exchanged 1,000 times before. This was deliberate contact, sustained closeness, the kind that meant something neither of us could pretend to misunderstand. I could smell him, not just his deodorant or the faint scent of laundry detergent, but him underneath it all, something warm and familiar that made my chest ache. I've been close to him before, sitting on the bench or driving in his car, but never like this. Never with permission, never with intention. His hand moved on my back, sliding up slightly, his fingers spreading wider like he was trying to touch as much of me as possible. The movement was slow, exploratory, like he was memorizing the shape of me, learning what it felt like to hold me this way. I let my free hand come up to rest on his shoulder, and I felt the tension there. His muscles were tight, coiled, like his whole body was braced for something. For rejection, maybe. For me to push him away and ask what he thought he was doing. For reality to crash back in and remind us both why this was impossible. But I didn't push him away. I let my hand slide from his shoulder to the back of his neck, my fingers brushing against the short hair there, and I felt him shiver. The rain grew louder, or maybe I was just more aware of it. It created a barrier between us and everything else. In here, we were safe. In here, we could pretend that this moment would last forever, that we'd never have to step back into the world where things like this required explanation. Jonah's steps slowed even further until we were barely moving at all, just swaying in place, holding each other in the dim light while the storm raged outside. His breath was warm against my skin, coming in short, uneven bursts that told me he was struggling with the same overwhelming feeling that was threatening to swallow me whole. And I realized something that should have been obvious all along. Jonah's steps weren't awkward because he didn't know how to dance. They were careful because he did. Because he'd thought about this. Because in all those late nights when we'd been alone in this gym, he'd been imagining what it would feel like to hold me exactly like this. He'd been waiting, just like I had. Afraid, just like I was. And now that we'd finally stopped waiting, neither of us knew how to let go. When we stopped moving, I wasn't sure which of us made the decision. Maybe neither of us did. Maybe we just ran out of momentum, out of pretense, out of reasons to keep our bodies in motion when what we really wanted was to be still together. But we didn't pull apart. Jonah's hand stayed pressed against my back, warm and solid, anchoring me in place. His other hand still held mine, our fingers laced together now, locked in a grip that felt more like a lifeline than a dance position. We stood there in the center of the court, not moving, barely breathing, the rain the only sound in the vast, empty space around us. His forehead came to rest against mine, The contact was gentle, almost tentative, like he was testing to see if I'd allow it. But I didn't move away. I couldn't. My whole body felt frozen, caught between wanting to run and wanting to stay in this moment forever. I could feel his breath on my face, warm and unsteady. Could see his eyes, so close that everything else blurred into irrelevance. Brown, flecked with gold in the dim light, and filled with something I'd never seen there before. Fear, hope, desperation. My heart was beating so hard I was certain he could feel it, could hear it, could sense the way every part of me was screaming at the closeness of him, at the impossibility of this moment, at the fact that we were here at all. The words came out before I could stop them, barely more than a whisper. You lied. Jonah's eyes closed, his lashes dark against his cheeks. His jaw tightened. When he spoke, his voice was rough, strained, like each word cost him something. I didn't lie. I just didn't know I could. I felt my throat tighten, felt the pressure building behind my eyes. The vulnerability in his voice was devastating. This was Jonah, who never admitted weakness, who built walls out of laughter and bravado, who kept everyone at arm's length with carefully crafted charm. And here he was stripped bare, trembling against me. Dance? I whispered, needing to understand what we were really talking about. He shook his head, the movement small, barely perceptible. His forehead stayed pressed to mine, and I felt the friction of it, the warmth. Feel like this. The confession was quiet, but it filled every inch of silence between us. 3 words that changed everything. 3 words that confirmed what I'd been afraid to believe, what I'd spent months trying not to want. My chest ached. My eyes burned. I couldn't speak, couldn't move, couldn't do anything but stand there and let the weight of what he'd just said settle over me. Jonah's thumb moved against my back again, that same small circular motion, like he needed to keep touching me, needed the contact to ground himself. His hand tightened around mine. I wanted to say something, to tell him I understood, that I'd felt it too, that every late night in this gym had been an exercise in restraint. That every joke we'd shared had been a way to avoid admitting what was really happening between us. That I'd been lying to myself just as much as he had. But the words wouldn't come. They felt too big, too dangerous. Once I said them out loud, there would be no taking them back. No pretending this was just a moment of confusion, a weird night, something we could laugh about later and dismiss. So instead, I just stayed still, my forehead against his, our breath mingling in the space between us. And I let him see me, really see me. Let him look into my eyes and find whatever truth he needed to find there. His hand moved on my back, sliding up to rest between my shoulder blades. The touch was firmer now, more certain, like he was gathering courage from somewhere deep inside himself. When he spoke again, his voice was barely audible, fragile in a way that made my heart crack open. I've been thinking about this for so long. About you. About what it would feel like to stop pretending I didn't want to. The admission hung in the air between us, raw and honest and terrifying. I could feel him shaking now, subtle tremors running through his body into mine. He was giving me everything, every secret he'd kept locked away, and trusting that I wouldn't destroy him with it. I thought about all the times I'd caught him watching me, all the conversations that had gone on too long, stretched past the point of casual friendship into something neither of us had named. All the moments when his hand had lingered on my shoulder, when his smile had softened at the edges, when his voice had dropped into something quieter and more real. It hadn't been in my head. It had been mutual all along. We'd both been dancing around this for months, circling closer and closer, waiting for one of us to be brave enough to stop running. My free hand came up to touch his face, my fingers trembling as they made contact with his jaw. His stubble was rough under my fingertips, and I felt him lean into the touch, felt the way his breath caught. How long? I asked, needing to know, needing to understand the timeline of this, when friendship had shifted into something else. Jonah's eyes opened, finding mine, and what I saw there was devastating in its honesty. Since the beginning, maybe before I even knew what it meant. The rain continued its steady rhythm against the roof, marking seconds that felt like hours. We stood there, foreheads touching, bodies pressed together, finally admitting what we'd both been too afraid to say. And I realized that this moment, right here, was the line we'd been approaching for 2 years. Everything before had been preparation. Everything after would be consequence. But for now, we were balanced on the edge, holding each other in the dim light, finally telling the truth. Jonah took a breath, deep and shaky, and I felt it move through both of us. His chest expanded against mine, then deflated slowly, like he was trying to steady himself, trying to find the courage for whatever came next. His hand shifted on my back, sliding down slightly before his thumb found the back of my hand where our fingers were still laced together. He brushed across my knuckles, a touch so gentle it made my throat tight. When he spoke, his voice was barely more than a whisper, rough with fear and want in equal measure. If I start, I don't think I can stop. The words landed between us like a confession and a warning all at once. I understood what he meant, what he was really saying, that this moment was a door we could still choose not to walk through. That once we crossed this line, everything would change. Our friendship, our late nights in this gym, the careful distance we'd maintained that had kept us both safe from exactly this. He was giving me a choice, giving us both one last chance to step back, to laugh this off, to pretend it had just been a weird moment brought on by dim lights and rain and the strange intimacy of an empty space. But I didn't want to step back. I'd spent 2 years stepping back, maintaining boundaries, protecting myself from wanting something I'd convinced myself I couldn't have. And I was tired of pretending, tired of the ache in my chest every time Jonah smiled at someone else, tired of going home alone and replaying every conversation, looking for meaning in words that were probably just words. I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw my own fear reflected back at me. But I saw something else too. Hope. Desperate, fragile hope that I might say yes, that I might want this as much as he did. My hand was still on his face, my thumb resting against his cheekbone. I let it move just slightly, a small caress that made his eyes flutter closed. Then don't, I said. The words were simple, 2 syllables, but they carried the weight of everything I'd been too afraid to say for months. They were permission, acceptance, a door opening instead of closing. Jonah's eyes opened, finding mine, searching for certainty in my expression. I watched something shift in his face. The fear was still there, but it was being overtaken by something stronger. Relief, wonder, a kind of desperate gratitude that made my chest ache. He exhaled, long and slow, and I felt the tension in his body start to unravel, not disappearing, but transforming into something else, something gentler. Less like panic and more like surrender. His hand came up to cup the side of my face, his palm warm against my cheek. His thumb brushed just below my eye, a touch so tender it made me want to close the distance between us myself. But I waited. Let him set the pace. Let him choose the exact moment. He leaned forward slowly, giving me time to change my mind, to pull away, to take back my permission. But I didn't move. I stayed perfectly still, my heart hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat, and I waited for him to close the last impossible inches between us. His forehead touched mine again first. Then his nose brushed against mine, a gentle nudge that felt like a question. I answered by tilting my head slightly, adjusting the angle, making space for what came next. When his lips finally found mine, it wasn't rushed or desperate. It was slow, deliberate, like a continuation of the dance we'd been doing, another kind of movement that required trust and vulnerability and the courage to be honest. The kiss was soft at first, almost tentative, like he was still afraid I might disappear. But then I kissed him back, let my hand slide from his face to the back of his neck, pulled him closer, and everything shifted. He made a sound quiet and broken, and his hand tightened on my back. The kiss deepened, became more certain, and I tasted 2 years of wanting in the way his lips moved against mine. Every late night we'd spent alone. Every conversation that had gone on too long. Every moment of restraint finally releasing into this. My other hand was still in his, and he squeezed it, his fingers lacing tighter with mine like he needed the anchor. Like he was afraid that if he let go, this moment would dissolve, and we'd wake up to find it had never happened. But it was happening. It was real. I could feel the warmth of his mouth, the slight scratch of stubble against my face, the the way his breath mixed with mine. Could feel the tremor in his hands, the rapid beat of his heart, the way he was holding me like I was something precious he'd been afraid to break. When we finally pulled apart, it was only by inches, just far enough to breathe, to see each other's faces, to confirm that this was real and not some shared hallucination brought on by loneliness and dim lighting. Jonah's eyes were bright, almost glassy, and when he smiled, it was different from any smile I'd seen on his face before. Softer, more real, stripped of the performance he usually gave the world. He laughed, quiet and disbelieving, his forehead coming to rest against mine again. Guess I do dance after all. His voice was thick with emotion, shaky with relief and joy, and the overwhelming realization that the thing we'd both wanted had finally happened. I smiled against his skin, my hand still on the back of his neck, holding him close. Yeah, I whispered, "You really do." And in that moment, standing in the center of an empty gym with rain drumming on the roof and our hearts beating in sync, I understood that everything had changed. We'd crossed the line we'd been avoiding, and there was no going back to what we'd been before. But I didn't want to go back. For the first time in my carefully controlled life, I wanted to move forward into the unknown. That was 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks since the night the rain turned the gym into our confession booth, since Jonah pulled me into the center of the court and finally admitted what we'd both been hiding. 3 weeks since everything changed and somehow stayed exactly the same. We still meet at the gym after practice. Still stay long after everyone else has gone home, the building settling into its after-hours quiet around us. But now there's a difference in the way we move through the space. A new awareness that hums between us like a current, invisible but constant. Jonah still jokes, still fills silences with noise when other people are around, still performs the version of himself that everyone expects. But when it's just us, when the doors lock and the lights dim, the performance falls away. He gets quiet, soft, real. Sometimes we actually practice, run drills, work on our shots, do the things we originally used as excuses to be alone together. But other times we just sit on the floor with our backs against the wall, shoulders touching, talking about everything and nothing. He tells me things he's never told anyone, about the pressure he feels to be a certain way, to live up to expectations he never agreed to, about how exhausting it is to always be on, always smiling, always pretending he has it all figured out, about the loneliness of being surrounded by people who only know the version of him he lets them see. I tell him about my need for control, about the anxiety that makes me count steps and plan contingencies and keep everything in neat, manageable boxes, about how terrifying it is to want something I can't predict or control, about how he scares me because he makes me want to stop planning and just feel. We're learning each other in a new language now, one that doesn't rely on deflection or distance, one that's built on honesty and vulnerability and the slow, careful work of letting someone see you completely. Every so often, when the lights are low and the world feels far away, Jonah stands up and holds out his hand. He doesn't ask anymore, doesn't make jokes about not dancing. He just reaches for me, and I take his hand, and we move together across the polished floor. No music, never music, just the sound of our breathing, the whisper of our shoes, the quiet rhythm we've built between us. Sometimes it's slow, our bodies press close, his forehead against mine while we sway in place. Other times it's looser, more playful, him spinning me out and pulling me back, and while I laugh at the absurdity of it. But it's always ours, private, sacred, a ritual that belongs only to us. He's gotten better at it, or maybe he was always good and just needed permission to show me. His steps are more confident now, his hands more certain on my body. But there's still that edge of reverence in the way he holds me, like he can't quite believe he's allowed to do this. Like he's afraid I might change my mind. I won't, though. I can't. Because somewhere in the last 3 weeks, this stopped being about attraction or chemistry or whatever name you want to give to the pull between two people. It became about recognition, about finding someone who sees past the careful facade you show the world and loves what they find underneath. Last Tuesday, after a particularly brutal practice, we were both exhausted, sweaty and sore and ready to go home. But when everyone else filtered out, Jonah lingered by the bench, readying his shoes for the third time. I knew what he was doing, stalling, hoping I'd stay. I always stay. When the last teammate left and the door clicked shut, Jonah looked up at me. He didn't say anything, didn't need to. I could read the question in his eyes, the same one he asks without words every time we're alone now. I walked over to him, held out my hand this time, reversing our roles. He smiled, soft and a little surprised, and placed his hand in mine. I pulled him to his feet and then into the middle of the court, to the spot that's become ours over the weeks. The circle at half court, where everything began. We moved together in the silence, and I realized that this had become my favorite part of the day. Not the games, or the practices, or the social events where we have to pretend we're just friends. But this, the quiet moments when it's just us, dancing to music only we can hear, being honest in the only way that matters. Jonah's hand was warm on my back, his other hand holding mine like it was something precious. His eyes were closed, his expression peaceful in a way I rarely see when other people are around. And I thought about how far we'd come from that first night, when we were both terrified of what this meant. We're still terrified sometimes, still figuring out what we are to each other, what this looks like beyond the walls of this gym. But we're doing it together, one slow step at a time, building something neither of us quite knows how to name yet. The thing about dancing is that it requires trust. You have to believe your partner will catch you when you lean, will lead you safely through the steps, will hold you when the music stops. Jonah holds me, every time, without fail. And in the quiet of the gym, with the rest of the world locked outside, we keep moving, keep learning the rhythm of each other. Keep building this slow, careful dance that started with a lie about not knowing how and became the most honest thing either of us has ever done. Because what we have now isn't just attraction or chemistry or even love, though maybe it's becoming that too. It's a rhythm we built together. A dance neither of us ever wants to end.